That doesn't sound good. Somebody call Elon Musk right now. We have a technical problem here. He's not available? He's rehearsing? What would he be rehearsing for? So actually, no, that's one of our topics today. On the nose is Elon Musk will be the host of Saturday Night Live tomorrow night. That'll be our first topic today. A little bit later, we'll talk about, there's the list in Rolling Stone of the 100 best sitcoms. I don't find lists of that kind to be particularly interesting, but it's a nice opportunity to talk about what sitcoms are, what they do for us, how they might also have changed, whether or not their theme songs play without having to skip all over the place. All kinds of things that we can talk about. Baby, it wondered what became me. That would be the WKRP song, played the way that ours just played. All right, so, and then a little bit later, we're going to talk about This is a Robbery. This is a docuseries on Netflix about the theft at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in 1990 of all kinds of priceless things. And so, first of all, let's welcome onto the show. I'm a little bit rattled here by what happened with the theme music, so excuse me for that. But two of our favorite panelists, Carolyn Payne, actress, comedian, dancer, tool user, as it turns out, founder, director, choreographer of Kinetic Dance. The tool user thing is a reference to a recent commercial gig that Carolyn had when she would. What were you posing? You were posing with something that hangs something from something else, right?
Yeah, I guess in that specific one, it's a level, but I shot a day of ads for DeWalt tools, and they had somebody there from DeWalt who had to teach me how to use all the tools. But I think I look like I really know what I'm doing. I feel proud about it.
All right. So if you get any like loose tiles or anything in your house, call Carolyn Payne. If she's not too busy, she'll come over. Bill Usman, professor of media studies at Sacred Heart University. We have no information about whether or not he is handy.
I am the opposite of handy. Would that be footy?
Yeah, footy. You would be footy. Yeah, you're very footy.
But I have been called a tool.
Okay,
from time to time.
So there you go.
So does that count?
Yeah, that's our Papulian through line from guest to guest.
Right.
So we're going to begin with Elon Musk. He is the host of Saturday Night Live tomorrow night, and Miley Cyrus is the musical guest. And I mean, before we sort of get into this, I mean, it's worth noting that Musk has appeared on other stuff. He was in Iron Man 2. He's in The Big Bang Theory for a cameo in a couple of seconds. You'll also hear another cameo that he did that kind of is also a Papulian through line between our two segments. But so I'm kind of saving and I'm building up excitement. But, you know, in recent years, he's started to be kind of a crank. He does weird things. He gave his kid a weird mathematical formula name. He got himself involved in the plan to save the soccer players trapped in the cave in Thailand, and then attacked one of the divers who actually did perform the actual rescue with unfounded accusations of pedophilia. He denied the severity of the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, there's sort of a sense in which Elon Musk may be understood as a little bit less of an asset these days and a little bit more of something that sounds vaguely like asset than he was understood before. So, but Carolyn, let's begin here. You actually think that Saturday Night Live might be able to get something a little bit fresher going out of a guest hosting thing like this?
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I don't know if it's because it's like kind of morbid curiosity, like wanting to see the train wreck. Because here's the thing. So SNL, you have this cast of like top-notch comedians and improvisers, and they're going to be paired with this, you know, I mean, sure, he's done these cameos, but it's like kind of mostly just playing himself. So I think that this is going to be a challenge for the cast. I think it's going to make it like wild and exciting. And I actually am looking forward to this more than I was to see like Nick Jonas host, like whatever, sure. But Elon, like this, totally off the rails. And I am there for it. I also love all his tweets suggesting all the sketches he should be in.
Right, including, well, actually, he initially said he tweeted that he had some skits in mind. And somebody, Chris Rudd, I think, from the cast had to say, well, first of all, call them sketches. Skits are kind of what, you know, your employees do at the cafeteria, you know, and somebody's leaving or something. So yeah, Bill, I don't know. Michael Che had an interesting take in a radio interview he did. He said, he said, black people love their billionaires. If we were having Oprah on, everybody really be really happy because white people don't like their billionaires very much. And that seems to be part of the problem here. But I don't know. There's some questions about whether Musk is a neutral enough figure to be a comedy host.
Yeah. And, I don't think you necessarily need to be a neutral figure. But can you be a really, really, really awful figure? I think Carolyn's right that, I think part of the appeal of this, and I think this is what SNL is actually hoping for, is that people think it's going to go off the rails. And so, they're going to watch just to see it go off the rails. We read one piece in The Atlantic about this, where the author, she is just totally against this. She thinks the whole thing is what she calls a trap. And she thinks even talking about it is a trap. Of course, she's writing about it. So, did she fall into that trap? But I think in that particular piece, I kind of feel like she overstates the case about how terrible this is. I do think, by all accounts, as you said, Colin, Musk is a terrible person. In fact, there's a few pieces about this on Vox, and Vox has one where they list all of the reasons why he's a terrible person, including a lot of stuff about COVID and vaccine disinformation and a lot of really bad labor practices. And, I'm a white person, so I do agree with, that take that we need to stop licking the boots of these horrible billionaires. But for a couple different reasons, I just don't think it's all that crucial. First of all, I don't think SNL has the cultural relevance it once had. And the author of this Atlantic piece says having Musk as host erodes the series' reputation as a cultural gatekeeper. But, I think that reputation was eroded a long time ago. They had Trump as a host. They had Andrew Dice Clay. Sarah Palin has appeared. So, I'm not so sure about, that whole idea of how incredibly impactful this is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Saturday Night Live has experienced a recent period of some relevance. Just in the Trump era was kind of made for a certain kind of comedy. Alec Baldwin kind of came forward and made his Trump impersonation one of the signatures of the show. I think it was a little bit more in the conversation in recent years. They've done some stuff to kind of make the cast a little bit more hip and relevant. Some of those people are the ones who are having a little bit of trouble with Musk. Bowen Yang, in particular, has been on social media asking some questions about why Musk is hosting, as has A.D. Bryant and the aforementioned Chris Redd, maybe a little bit. But yeah, I mean, Carolyn, we'll just sort of do comedy nerd stuff for a moment and just say, there is a kind of safety that exists if you're doing sketch comedy with a bunch of other people who know how to do comedy. And there's even a sense of what the reality of the sketch is, whether it's improv or a written sketch or whatever you're doing. And when you introduce somebody like this into it, just as, yes, when they had Trump guest hosting, there's just a way in which you don't have a pure comedy experience. You have like six people doing comedy and a seventh person who is just kind of there in this much more gray area. And I can understand, at least, and I'm sure you can, why some cast members might wonder whether that's going to be that easy to carry them through something like that.
Yeah, I think that, for the reason I want to watch it, because I know that it's just going to be so much more challenging for them as comedians. Like, they're going to have to really be so much more on their toes and carry a lot more weight. Unless maybe, who knows, maybe he could surprise us. Like, watch Elon Musk. This is like his secret, talent. All of a sudden he just like whips out that he's real fast and funny, which I highly doubt is going to be.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. But, I figured I'd throw it out there. But as a performer, like, for them, they're going to be feeling a lot of anxiety going into this just because they don't have that safety net is gone right now. The pacing that they're used to working with. Even when it's an actor or a musician who isn't like a comic per se, they're still a performer. And there are just certain things that you become accustomed to and know how to do and react and, you know, where to go as a performer. And he just is not going to have that.
No, you have to have kind of a relationship with the camera too. And even some of the athletes that they've had on, like Peyton Manning, Charles Barkley, if you go back far enough, Fran Tarkenton, they were really good because they've been talking to the camera for years, you know, and they sort of know how to have that relationship. I do want to say also that Saturday Night Live has this very kind of complicated identity. This guy, Jim Downey, who's Robert Downey Jr.'s brother, I think, has been in charge forever of political humor and Weekend Update and stuff like that. And he's, you know, there's all kinds of speculation about what his actual political leanings are, but he has made an effort, I think, over the years to keep it kind of value neutral so that, you know, you'd be as likely to get a Biden joke as a Trump joke or whatever. And I think every time they do this, and you know Lorne Michael is like sucking up to Elon Musk and kind of saying, well, we won't take it too far. And that's a problem, I think. I mean, I think comedy needs permission to go too far. And when the object of your humor is standing right next to you, it's a little harder to do. But speaking of comedy, we're going to do a little bridge here. We're going to even have a clip for it because here's Elon Musk on what is apparently the greatest sitcom of all time.
Like Stubbs Family, B.
All right, forget that. There's the machines have turned against us. And it's starting to feel like maybe Elon Musk is making his move right now and injecting some virus into us. Well, yeah, Rolling Stone has picked the 100 best sitcoms of all time. They had 4 writers working on it. I'll give you just the kind of top 10 to give you a sense of at least the breadth of their approach, and I'll do it Letterman style, starting with number 10, The Larry Sanders Show, number 9, Parks and Recreation, number 8, The Honeymooners, number 7, Mary Tyler Moore Show, number 6, MASH, number 5, All in the Family, number 4, I Love Lucy, number 3, Seinfeld, number 2, Cheers, and number 1, The Simpsons, from which we were just trying to play a clip in which Elon Musk appeared. So I don't know, Bill, maybe we could just start with one thing that you and I were kind of writing back and forth a little bit today. It's looking at the whole 100 sitcom list, I'm realizing, that there isn't just one thing that's a sitcom. There's, I think it's evolved and changed a lot over the years, but that we have a real special relationship with some of these sitcoms too. The ones we love, they do certain things for us. And I'm guessing as a media studies professor, you have some thoughts about what those things are.
Yeah, I love sitcoms, and sitcoms have been kind of like this ongoing presence in my life. I'm old enough now that sitcoms have been a presence in my life for decades, and they've always given me a lot of pleasure. But over those decades, the whole sitcom form has really, really changed and evolved a lot. And of course, you know, I've been changing. And so as these programs are changing and we're also growing and we're changing, I think for a lot of people, they continue to almost play like this touchstone role in our life. You know, for one thing, they're really easy to watch. They're short, they're quick. Usually there's a pattern where things get easily resolved in that 22 minutes or whatever it is. Although these days as they're trying to stretch the form, that's not always necessarily the case. And some of my favorites make it pretty high on this list. Seinfeld is way up there at, I think, like 2 or 3. Curb Your Enthusiasm is like 11 or 12. And of course, the two things that those have in common are Larry David. And, you know, so for me, there's, you know, can you find something that you really identify with in these shows? And I think we all find our different things to identify with. And my wife is absolutely convinced that there is no one closer to me in popular culture than the Larry David of Curb Your Enthusiasm. That's not necessarily flattering, but she means it with affection. My ringtone on her phone is even the theme song. That's it. And so I think we relate to the ones that we see ourselves in. And so they speak to something about how the culture develops, but also how we as human beings grow and develop over time.
Yeah, I think that's true. I want to say some more about it, but I want to hear from you, Carolyn. I don't know, just in general. I know you've been doing some sitcom binging during the pandemic. I don't know. What did you take away from this list?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because during the pandemic, like we've had all this extra time and, you kind of ran out of new things to watch. And my roommate, Alex, and I ended up kind of doing a deep dive into older stuff. And I agree with Bill that there's like a certain comfort that comes from that and like sharing favorite sitcoms from the past. And we went deep. We actually have just recently rewatched almost all of I Love Lucy, which is a favorite of mine. And of course, that is, right at the top of this list, and deservedly so. I mean, it really holds up in a lot of ways. Some episodes not as much, but it really still is hilarious and wonderful. And I agree also, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, Seinfeld, yes, great. But and I love that this list had The Comeback on it.
It's a great show.
And I feel like it never got the attention that it really deserved. And I think Lisa Kudrow was just truly spectacular in that. And it was a really well put together show. But, this list is interesting because, like I said, not only did we rewatch I Love Lucy, but we kind of went back. We've watched Frasier. I introduced Alex to Curb Your Enthusiasm, which he had never really seen. Just even like catching things like old, like Laverne and Shirley, like shows that I had never really watched in full. I have kind of gone back and sort of tried to watch, maybe not the whole thing, but episodes of. So this list was more interesting to me right now because I feel like I have actually watched more of these that kind of came before my time. I've gone back and revisited recently. And I think a lot of people have been kind of revisiting older shows or shows that they used to watch because it's comforting. There is something really wonderful about sitcoms because there's the soothing nature of them and these characters that you kind of know and love. And even if it's a show like that you didn't watch before, you're familiar with what the character is. So there's a certain ease of getting into them.
Yeah, so I think that one of my takeaways from this, I've thought a lot about sitcoms over the years. By the way, my version of The Comeback would be Buffalo Bill, which is on this list. It's a much older sitcom. It starred Dabney Coleman, the young Gina Davis. It was her first gig of any significance, I think, and a whole bunch of other people. And he basically played Bill O'Reilly, except that Bill O'Reilly didn't exist at the time. This is decades before Bill O'Reilly. And it's just terrific. And I've gone back and looked at clips from it, and I still think it's funny. Anyway, one of the things that I think a lot about sitcoms is that they are a way of processing usually one of two, or in some cases both of two experiences, being in a family and having a job, right? So, a lot of the sitcoms that we really love are about a workplace. There's usually a Mary Tyler Moore type figure or Judd Hirsch in Taxi, someone who's kind of an every person who kind of, is the Charlie Brown, is the person who kind of is our stand-in watching all this insanity unfold. And then you have people who are kind of in touch with different realities, people who are horrible people like Danny DeVito's character on Taxi, and all the people that you really ultimately do encounter in your job. And you have to learn how to laugh at or with some of the people in your actual workplace and tolerate those differences and maybe even celebrate them and enjoy having somebody really wacky or difficult, or, at least find some way to deal with it. And it's the same with our families too. Now, I think one of the things that did happen over the last 20 or so years is that there was this kind of sense that sitcom idealized the family, or at least comforted us about the family. And I think, one of the things that happened gradually, maybe starting with All in the Family, but certainly with shows like Married with Children and The Simpsons, was this idea that, well, maybe families are really screwed up, and that they're, we should just sort of accept the fact that families don't necessarily function the way that they're supposed to. But Bill, I do feel like sitcoms are very much a way that, well, Carolyn, I think correctly said they comfort us. And one way they comfort us is just about getting us to laugh about two very stressful situations, dealing with one's family and dealing with one's coworkers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. For myself, I know that as a kid, this is when this habit began. My family life, honestly, was really challenging when I was young, and a sitcom and a bowl of some salty snack or something was a real oasis for me. I think that's a lot of. Recently, we talked about WandaVision on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot of what that show is trying to touch on, right? How we can use a sitcom like a salve or a warm tub, when life is just actually outside of the screen, really, really heartbreaking at times. I know Lori and I have been binging the first Bob Newhart show lately. And, even though, like, if you compare it to today's sitcoms, it's fairly primitive, but it also was a real development at the time with this kind of cool egalitarian marriage, which, and no kids. And, that show started in 1972, where that was just 4 years between that show and the Andy Griffith show, which was very, very different. And I think from 68 to 72, it just shows how much America was changing during that really, tumultuous time period. And then, of course, television follows along more often than not, rather than lead the way.
So I think also the argument that people who are in psychiatric treatment, that their neuroses and their difficulties could be funny in a way that wasn't necessarily denigrating, but kind of, psychotherapy had been maybe something that had been stuffed under the rug during the 1960s.
Right.
And, there's a sense, oh no, they're just basically like us. They're maybe a little bit more difficult, and they're kind of funny and endearing, right?
Yeah, some of the best parts of that show are those group therapy sessions. And in fact, I was asking Lori just last night, I wonder if people would kind of like get angry about that now, because I agree with you that we were laughing, but not in a horribly denigrating way. But I wonder if that show was on the air now, whether, people would take exception to that and like consider it to be demeaning. I don't think it was. I think it was more kind of like fondly poking at ourselves, but I think you're right.
I thought about those same things, Carolyn. Do the standards change? And I'm not sure that they do in comedy. I mean, the rule that we always talk about in comedy is if you can make it funny enough, you can do almost anything. And so, I mean, Arrested Development was about with people with just terrible, terrible psychiatric problems and family dynamics, and every possible way that things could get screwed up. And it certainly had a pretty jaundiced eye towards pretty much all of its characters, and even though Jason Bateman kind of played sort of a more or less halfway normal person trying to make things work, I mean, everybody was kind of terrible. And in Seinfeld, everybody's kind of terrible. Jerry's the closest thing to a normal person. And Carolyn, I sort of wonder, I think one of the things about comedy is you can ask questions that would make people squirm in other situations.
Yeah, I think that comedy is actually at its best when it's at its worst, meaning that, I mean, Arrested Development. Yeah. Like when you have Lucille Bluth, the matriarch, just being a total drunk bitch. And then, you have these adults acting like grown, they're just children. They're overgrown children. And their inability to take responsibility for anything and move themselves forward. Like these are people that you're watching, and there is the kind of the sense that it's funny. And also you're like, well, at least I'm more together than Buster Bluth.
There you go.
Some days.
You've got your salty snack and you can feel superior to Buster. All right, we should probably take a break here pretty soon. I do want to say, to Bill's point about the Bob Newhart show, that in the series For All Mankind, there is a scene, this isn't a spoiler really, these 3 astronauts get stuck on the moon for a while. They're not in danger, but they're just going to have to stay there longer. And it's earlier in history, and so they have for some reason or other, basically the only videotape they have that works is of the Bob Newhart show, and they just watch it over and over again until it breaks, and then they start actually trying to stage it or recreate it among themselves. And one of the three astronauts is like a little bit too involved with the Bob Newhart show, but for the rest of their lives, they greet one another with "Hi Bob, hi Bob, hi Bob." They all call each other Bob. All right, so we have to take a little break here, and we're going to come back. We're going to talk about. Oh, I have to warn you, we're going to take a little break here, and if you're listening live here on Friday, the break might not sound that great unless we fix this problem. So just bear with us. We kind of have to play the break for complicated reasons, and then we'll be back to talk about This Is a Robbery.
Got kind of tired of packing and unpacking, town to town, up and down the dial. Maybe you and me were never meant to be. Just maybe think of me once in a while. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.
Okay, I lied. Everything works because Gene Amatruda walked in, and all these machines are Gene's subjects, and they just obey him. He doesn't have to do anything. He just stands there. He's like the alpha dog. They all start cowering. So everything's working again. And Carolyn Payne and Bill Usman are our guests here on our panelists on The Nose today. We're going to talk right now about This Is a Robbery. The World's Biggest Art Heist is the full title. A 4-part Netflix docuseries on the 1990 robbery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. This is a very Boston-y, Carolyn's going to be in her element, a very Boston-y docuseries. I don't know if Boston-y is really an adjective. So let's hear a little clip. This is from episode 1, and you're getting kind of a little description of at least part of the heist.
It's confounding. It's hard to figure out why you would, in a museum with priceless pieces of art, waste precious time with this finial that is essentially worthless.
They had taken a Chinese artifact.
It's a Chinese coup. It's old, it is somewhat valuable, but not even close to some of the other items of art just in that room.
Was the Chinese artifact a diversion?
There was one, the self-portrait of Rembrandt, where his eyes sort of follow you around the room. They tried to steal that, and they took it down off the wall, and for some reason it was left behind, and they don't know if it was just too big or they forgot it.
One thing that stuck out to me was the Rembrandt etching. It's the size of like a postage stamp, but the frame it was in isn't much bigger. And yet somebody wasted time unscrewing that and then taking apart the whole frame and taking only the etching, right? If you're carrying out the biggest heist in history and you don't know if the police are coming and you have limited time to get the most valuable artwork, are you going to waste your time with an etching that isn't even that expensive and waste precious moments taking it out of a frame that you could probably stick in your pocket regardless? I would say no.
All right, so that's kind of a melange of law enforcement officials and Shelley Murphy, who's a reporter for the Boston Globe, who's one of the big sort of major running commentators all the way through this. This series kind of mixes people who are in law enforcement, people who are in museums and the art world, a fair number of journalists who've covered the underworld, shall we say, and then a few people and just sort of people who are just know one little story or something. So, Carolyn, we'll start with you because you're a Bostonian. First of all, just give me your just overall reaction to the series.
I loved it. So I binged this the day it came out. Growing up in Boston, this was kind of just like always part of like folklore almost. Like people just talked about it. It would just randomly get injected like into a conversation. Like somebody would be talking about a museum and then all of a sudden or anything, and somebody would just bring this up. And everyone, I feel I would hear crazy theories about all sorts of things, and you'd hear all these like little inside stories. So I was kind of always fascinated by this. I actually, I double majored in college, and art history was one of my majors. And so I approached this really excitedly because it sort of touched base on so many things that have intrigued me and that I'm into. So I enjoyed it. I mean, I will sit and watch pretty much any true crime documentary though. So I'm an easy target, honestly.
Yeah, but I feel like this is sort of more somehow. First of all, I think it's probably clear I really enjoyed this as well. We should say that this was, until quite recently, the largest art heist in history. It's got some competition now. There were 13 works stolen. The concert by Johannes Vermeer is believed to be the most valuable stolen art object, or maybe a most valuable stolen object, I don't know, in the world. And you know, it has been a very, very difficult crime to solve. But, you know, Bill, I feel like somehow or other, if this were, I'd also listened to WBUR's excellent podcast a few years ago about this very same story. And loved that too. If this were just about a crime, I don't think it would be as interesting as it is, but it's hard for me to exactly express what else it's about.
Well, I think you touched on it in one of the emails that we all exchanged when you talked about some of the quirky little characters. I think that's actually the best part of it. I agree with you about that. I enjoyed it also. So I think we can give it, 3 thumbs up. I'm not sure I liked it as much as you and Caroline did. I think it's a good example of the type of investigative work that when you start picking at the threads of something, the connections can start to become really interesting. But also, maybe that's part of the problem for me, is that they didn't go far enough with some of those explorations. So at one point, they start alluding to some IRA involvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really interested and excited about that, but that didn't go anywhere. Not that that's the filmmaker's fault, since it does seem kind of like that was a blind alley. But then you have to kind of ask, okay, should it have been introduced at all? Except that the whole point of it, in some ways, is this labyrinth of blind alleys. But then some of the people that appear actually do become really, really interesting, colorful characters. And I do want to say, it's got this great local connection. It's got a Hartford-Manchester connection, which somehow I had forgotten about or never really took note of or something, because when that started to come up, I really perked up and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool here, that, some of these incredibly valuable works might be lurking, over near, Buckland Hills Mall or something.
Yeah, to me, Carolyn, it's a little bit like a big, huge Shakespeare comedy that's happening, with a whole bunch of cast members and different levels of society. It's kind of the Midsummer Night's Dream of true crime docuseries, in the sense that there are all these characters kind of popping up, rude mechanicals and more elegant people, and that you're really kind of seeing this parade of humankind as all these people kind of come forward. And I mean, I could go on quite a bit about this, and I'm supposed to be asking you a question. I do want to say one of the things that I think they do really well is, because eventually organized crime, what we might call the Cosa Nostra or something, seems to have something to do with all this, except you start to realize that The Sopranos was a bunch of mafia guys trying to grapple with the fact that they would never quite have the glory and luster of what they saw in the movies, that The Godfather was just so much bigger than what they could be. Paulie Walnuts, it's more real to him than his own life. And now you see in this documentary that these people should be so lucky as to be the people in The Sopranos. There's a way in which that whole thing is kind of run down in more small time than we blow it up into. But Carolyn, I do feel like, they're just, if you enjoy strange people, and I think maybe there's a particular kind of Boston strange person, that there's a way in which this can be very pleasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what makes documentaries interesting, are the people that they interview. And this one really did not disappoint. Like you said, it has a wonderful cast of characters. I find listening to Boston accents really, that's another oddly soothing thing to me. Just hearing that, the accents of all these characters, these mobsters or would-be mobsters that they have are, yeah, definitely like they're kind of like the extras on The Sopranos, that you can't even imagine how they were carrying out something like this. And I think that that's, to me, one of the things that like hooks me with these true crime documentaries and any documentary is like the people, the way that you really get attached to the character, and then realizing that this is a real person. And I just thought that this was really well, because I mean, it's 4 episodes, so it's pretty long. And it does, I agree with Bill, like it kind of follows like all these threads. It sort of goes all over the place. But I found that to be really interesting because it felt like they were trying to like leave no stone unturned. And I think the editing was really great with it. And I loved the like music scoring with it. And also, when we're talking about characters in this, we cannot leave out talking about Miles Connors, who is, I went down such a rabbit hole, like Googling him. He is worth the Googling and the questions and concerns and comedy value of everything he has to offer. He is a character that I definitely would like to like more of.
Right. Well, except I don't think you would. I mean, he's like a lot of incredibly dangerous people. He's kind of amusing and charming, but he's an incredibly dangerous person.
No, I don't want to go near him
right.
ever. Would never need to, but I am fascinated with him, and I feel like you could do a whole documentary about him.
Probably. Yeah. Apparently, Jonathan McNichol tried to, our producer, tried to persuade him to be on the show, or almost persuaded him to be on the show about something. I don't know. We've been sort of circling around some of these characters over the years. Well, Bill, Carolyn talked about editing, and this isn't something that the Barnacle brothers invented at all, but, increasingly, I think these days, very clever filmmakers and people who are making any kind of thing that involves the filming of reality have realized it's a mistake to think that your interview or the usable footage starts when some kind of formal questioning begins. A lot of times what's going on is the aside stuff. I mean, the example I was given to you guys, there's this very funny, kind of very minor character. She's like the ex-sister-in-law of some guy who might have been involved in the heist. But the interview with her starts with her drinking something out of a mug, and she puts it down and she goes, "I hate water," which has nothing to do with anything that they're going to talk about, except that somehow or other you've established, the kind of person that she is, and she's very spirited and quirky. They begin, one of the first characters we meet is this former museum security guard, but she's this kind of quirky woman with big glasses and a gray bob who sits cross-legged on her couch and like impersonates all the voices of everybody who was. I mean, either Colin Barnacle is really, really lucky to get all these really interesting people, or he has some kind of gift for making them be their best selves.
Yeah, probably a combination of both. But I also in all documentaries, I love those moments that when the filmmaker is smart enough to start the video, before the, as you said, the actual interview begins, and show us some of that. And then the moments after the person has stopped talking, to linger on them for a little bit. It's so revealing. Those are such really, really fantastic moments when filmmakers are smart enough to do that. Of course, it can be used really manipulatively also. Hitchcock, riffing off of a Russian theorist, used to talk about how through juxtaposition, you can just really change how people see a video still or a moment in a film. If you show, someone with a grin on their face and then you show a bowl of soup, you think the person's hungry. But if you show, a woman in a bikini, you think the person is lecherous, that kind of thing. So that can be done manipulatively. I don't think that Barnacle does in this case. I think, as you say, he just really brings out the quirkiness, the individual personalities that make all of these people such interesting characters, almost as if it's, a fiction script. Miles Connor, that you guys mentioned, he's almost like an American legend. He's like a Rob Roy McGregor or something. Somebody tells a little story about how supposedly he went through surgery without anesthesia after being shot 4 or 5 times. So, he is almost like kind of like this like little not well-known American legendary figure, but in real life is, horrible killer.
Super dangerous person. Yes. So I do want to say that for me, it was also interesting there's a person I know who is in this docuseries, Ed Mahoney from the Hartford Courant. And he's terrific. And I have to say, Ed Mahoney and I worked together in the same building for 20 years. And we weren't particularly close. We just are very, very different kinds of people. So I think I saw Ed Mahoney talk more in this documentary than I did in 20 years all accumulated at the Hartford Courant. But he's just terrific. Somehow or other, they put the camera on him, and he's a terrific storyteller, and he's like imitating certain things, and he's just conveying, what it's like to, like, Bobby Gentile gets out of prison. He wants to have lunch with Ed, and he makes Ed buy him 2 lunches. He takes one of them home. Which is exactly how down at the heels the mafia or organized crime or whatever you want to call it is at this point. But yeah, there is that kind of sense of people coming alive. And for that matter, Ryan McGuigan, who was the lawyer for Bobby Gentile, he's really good on camera. He's also a kind of Hartford figure. So yeah, Carolyn, I don't know if there's anything left to say other than how much we loved this thing. Although I think the other thing that it does do sort of, maybe not quite as well as it does, getting the kind of rascal side of all this, it does sort of remind you, I don't know, I suddenly realized I hadn't been to a museum in a really long time, and just looking at all this stolen art and looking at the Gardner's interiors and stuff like that. It does remind you of how wonderful art can be, even in this context.
Yeah. I mean, I guess during the pandemic, I did all the virtual tours of museums, like the Louvre did a virtual thing to, keep up art in your life. I do think that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum deserves endorsing in this moment if you have never been. And one of the most brilliant things that the museum did following this heist is they hung the empty frames back up on the wall in the exact locations, as you see in the documentary. Mm-hmm. And it's really powerful to see that when you're in the museum, to just see this empty hole where this once great work of art once hung, and it's still this unsolved crime, which feels infuriating that they can't put this together. Mm. But I do think go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum if you haven't ever gone, or go and give it a second look. It's a particularly magical museum. And I love that guy, the reporter from the Globe, who compares it to the D'Orsay.
Kevin Cullen. Yeah, he goes, people are going to think I'm a big snob when I make this analogy. Anyway, we have to take a quick break here, so we'll have time to make some other endorsements on the other side. All right, our technical producer today is noted art thief, cat burglar, pastor. And the producer of this episode is Jonathan McPants, who produces pretty much all of the noses that we ever do. And we're going to now make some endorsements now with Carolyn Payne and Bill Usman. So, Bill, why don't you go first?
Okay. So earlier in the show, I talked about how comforting sitcoms are, and you can just sort of relax with them. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I'm warning people with my endorsement. I want to endorse another 4-part documentary series called Exterminate All the Brutes. It's by Raoul Peck, who is a great filmmaker. And the title comes from it actually originates in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But Peck builds this film around a nonfiction book that uses that title by a Swedish historian. And then he refers to a couple other really important books. It's a 4-part documentary about the history of colonialism, genocide, white supremacy, and it is incredibly powerful and I think incredibly important. And the way he goes about constructing it, it's a lot of his own family stories, and he uses dramatic reenactments with Josh Hartnett, in them, and he uses some animation and historical footage and contemporary music that he uses ironically. The creativity that has gone into making this incredibly difficult story compelling for people to watch and to stick with. I can't recommend this highly enough. Exterminate all the brutes.
Exterminate all the brutes. All right. And Carolyn Payne, what are you going to recommend?
All right, 2 shows real quick. One is on HBO with Kate Winslet, Mayor of Easttown.
Yep, I'm addicted.
It is.
It's great.
So good. And Kate Winslet is just wonderful in it. And they nail the Delco accent, which is that kind of that Philadelphia accent. She does an amazing job. Some of the actors are a little over the top with theirs, but it's good. The acting in it is just impeccable. I have no idea where the story is going, and I'm hooked, and watch it if you aren't. And then if you are looking for another true crime documentary that has some fascinating characters, so to speak, it's kind of a little bit salacious and a little bit frothy, but Why Did You Kill Me on Netflix? It's a documentary about a woman who was killed, and her family uses MySpace. This took place, like a decade ago. Her family uses MySpace to try to catfish the killer. It is really, it is fascinating. And again, the people in it that they interview, specifically the mother of the young woman who was killed, is she really has a character arc throughout this documentary that is really quite intriguing. So if you're into a good true crime documentary, that one on Netflix is worth the watch.
Why Did You Kill Me? All right. So I'm going to recommend in the current issue of The New Yorker by Gideon Lewis Krauss, a piece called The UFO Papers. It's a long-form piece. You also may have heard it discussed on the New Yorker Radio Hour last Sunday. It's about something that we've also addressed on our show, and it involves at least one person whom we've had on our show a few times. It's about the sort of evolution of UFOs, and really sort of, in the 1940s, as it points out, like half of Americans were convinced that they were a real thing, and that there was something to this whole story, and it became more and more of a fringe and kind of laughable set of beliefs. And now, of course, it's circling back around, and the amount of official weight behind the idea that yes, there are things in the sky that are impossible to explain using conventional kinds of explanations, that we've sort of moved back into a different kind of conversation, although we're all very blasé about this also to a certain degree. The comedian Nate Bargatze, in his recent special, he said, I told my wife they just announced that UFOs are real, and she just went about her day, which is a little bit, I think, of what's in this piece, too, that we're all sort of a little bit numb to the fact that actually the government is saying these days, no, actually, you were right all along, UFO wackos. You're not wacko at all. There's stuff up there that we have no explanation for. This also ties in a little bit to, I'll just quickly endorse For All Mankind, which is something we talked about on the nose a few weeks ago, and I'm wrapping it up now. It's 2 seasons, and I hadn't finished it all, and it kind of gets into this whole question of the weaponization of space. So I would really recommend that you stay with that. Next week on The Nose, we are planning to talk about Mayor of Easttown. Alas, Carolyn and Bill will probably not be back to do that, although they're both apparently watching it. We don't know who will be with us, but you'll find out next Friday.
Waterbury, Alderberry, Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah.